The extraordinary complexity of biological quantum systems inspires wonder whether one attributes that complexity to natural processes, intelligent design, or some combination of factors. As we continue to uncover the quantum foundations of life, the philosophical questions raised by Paley over 2 centuries ago remain relevant, though transformed by our expanding scientific knowledge. The watchmaker argument hasn't disappeared, it has evolved, much like the biological systems it seeks to explain. But to evaluate these competing explanations properly, we must consider how they measure up against established scientific criteria, particularly the requirement of falsifiability. Scientific falsifiability in quantum design. For a theory to be considered scientific, it must meet a fundamental requirement established by philosopher Karl Popper in the mid-20th century, falsifiability. This principle states that for an idea to qualify as scientific, there must be some way to prove it wrong through observation or experimentation. A hypothesis that cannot be disproven, no matter what evidence might be discovered, falls outside the realm of science. This criterion helps separate scientific theories from philosophical or religious beliefs, which may be meaningful but aren't testable through scientific methods. This requirement creates a particular challenge when examining theories about historical events like the origin of life. We cannot travel back in time to directly observe how life began. Instead, scientists must develop hypotheses that make predictions about what evidence we should find today if their theory about the past is correct. These predictions must be specific enough that finding contradictory evidence would force a rejection or major revision of the theory. The hypothesis that DNA was engineered by advanced beings faces significant hurdles when evaluated against this falsifiability standard. For such a hypothesis to qualify as scientific, it would need to make specific testable predictions about what we should observe in DNA or biological systems that couldn't be explained by natural evolutionary processes. These predictions would need to be unique to the engineering hypothesis, finding evidence that could be explained equally well by both evolution and engineering wouldn't help distinguish between the competing explanations. For the quantum design hypothesis to be considered scientific, it must meet several key criteria, make predictions about biological features unexpected under evolutionary theory. And should these predictions are specific enough to test through observation or experimentation, specify conditions under which the hypothesis would be falsified, identify what evidence, if found, would prove the hypothesis wrong. Currently, quantum design proponents have struggled to meet these criteria. Most arguments for engineered DNA focus on the complexity of quantum biological systems and the improbability of their natural emergence. However, pointing to complexity alone doesn't constitute a falsifiable prediction. Evolution through natural selection provides a mechanism for complexity to increase over time without intelligent guidance. To distinguish design from evolution, proponents would need to identify specific features that could only result from intelligent engineering. The lack of falsifiable predictions represents the most significant scientific limitation of the quantum design hypothesis. Many arguments for engineered DNA take the form of this system is too complex to have evolved naturally, which is an argument from incredulity rather than a testable scientific claim. Such arguments don't specify what evidence would disprove the design hypothesis. If a natural pathway to quantum biological systems were discovered, proponents could simply claim the designer worked through natural laws. There are potential approaches that could test aspects of the quantum design hypothesis. Researchers might search for specific signatures of engineering in biological systems, patterns that serve no functional purpose but identify the creator. If DNA contained non-functional sequences that encoded meaningful information unrelated to biological function, this might suggest deliberate engineering. Reconstructing evolutionary pathways offers another avenue, demonstrating step-by-step natural pathways through which quantum biological systems could evolve would weaken the design argument. Conversely, consistent failure to reconstruct such pathways, despite extensive efforts, might strengthen the case for design, though it wouldn't prove it conclusively. Scientific attitudes toward quantum biology itself have evolved significantly over recent decades. Initially, many physicists and biologists were skeptical that quantum effects could play important roles in biological systems. The warm, wet environment of living cells seemed incompatible with delicate quantum phenomena, which typically require carefully controlled laboratory conditions. Experimental evidence has overcome this skepticism. The discovery of quantum coherence in photosynthetic systems represented a turning point in quantum biology's acceptance. Researchers have documented quantum tunneling in enzyme catalysis and quantum effects in DNA. These observations have established quantum biology as a legitimate scientific discipline with growing experimental support. This evolution in scientific attitudes illustrates how initially controversial ideas gain acceptance through rigorous experimental testing and falsifiable predictions. Quantum biologists predicted specific quantum effects in biological systems and developed experiments to test these predictions. When confirmed, the field gained credibility. Could the engineering hypothesis follow a similar path? Proponents would need to move beyond arguments based on complexity and probability. They would need to develop specific testable predictions about what we should observe if DNA were engineered by advanced beings, predictions distinct from what we would expect under evolutionary processes. Even if DNA functions as a quantum information processor, this doesn't necessarily indicate engineering. Natural selection could potentially discover and optimize quantum advantages through evolutionary processes. Just as eyes evolved to capture light, molecular structures may have evolved to capture quantum advantages. The quantum biology aspects of the hypothesis are increasingly supported by experimental evidence. Quantum coherence in photosynthesis, tunneling in enzymes, and potential quantum information processing in DNA are becoming established scientific facts. However, the design interpretation remains philosophical rather than scientific. Without falsifiable predictions distinguishing intelligent engineering from evolutionary processes, the design hypothesis cannot be empirically tested. This doesn't mean the hypothesis is wrong. It means it hasn't met the criteria for scientific theories. This distinction between quantum biology scientific status and quantum design's philosophical status highlights science's boundaries. Science addresses questions answerable through empirical testing. Some questions, including many about ultimate origins, may lie beyond these boundaries. When we reach these limits, we confront profound questions about our existence. How do we understand phenomena that science cannot fully explain? What does it mean if life's deepest mechanisms remain partially beyond our scientific grasp? If quantum capabilities weren't engineered by advanced beings, how did they arise? The primary scientific alternative suggests these remarkable quantum properties emerged through evolutionary processes operating over billions of years.